Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of you have listened to our program over the years and realize that we kind of tend to deal with subjects that work with people in midlife, one thing we know for sure is that most of us have raised children. The question is, are you one of those people out there who have found yourself becoming estranged by your own child? In other words, they just simply cut you off from their world and want to have anything to do with you or have you involved in their lives whatsoever. Sometimes you might find yourself feeling shame or guilt, asking yourself such questions: where did I go wrong? What did I do, and what can I do to rectify the situation, and will it ever help and get back to where it was before? Well, you might be interested to know that there are many people just like you out there who have actually experienced the same thing. On our program today, we're going to be talking with someone who shares the latest research and insights from more than 9,000 parents out there who have estranged adult children. And you'd be encouraged to know that you too can be happy again. But if you learn to plan ahead, prepare for emotional triggers, and prevail over setbacks and pain, you'll find yourself being able to work through this as you feel the experience from being rejected by one of your children, if not. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Help and Healing for Mothers of Estranged Adult Children. The title of the book is Done with the Crying. Our guest today, Sherry McGregor. Sherry, thank you for being on the program today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You know, this book here certainly is something that is hitting people pretty powerful. I mean, when you think of fact that you actually won a bronze medal in the Living Now Book Awards, you must be really hitting a nerve out there that's a lot more common than people think it is, isn't it?
Estrangement is very, very common. I mean, the statistics show, some of them, those studies show maybe like 25% of people out there experience estrangement. Of course, that's not just parents with estranged adult children. Those stats, there's not very many hard details on that. And so, but really when you think about it, when I started the website a few years ago, I wondered who would show up, and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. My email box is full every day. There's a peer support forum that is full of people talking about it. And it's very common. In fact, we're hearing more and more about it in the news.
Now, you certainly had experience with this, and I'll tell you what, so have I. What had happened is it's going on now close to 10 years, is my oldest daughter, what had happened is she had been living with her mom, and she also has a young daughter herself. And she simply came one day and says, Mom kicked me out of the house. And she'd been kind of one of these people who had been in and out, and even when she was in, I think, junior high school, was even living with a friend. I mean, we're kind of like looking at all this like, what's going on with this girl here? Mm-hmm. It wasn't like she wasn't loved or anything. And, so she just simply moved in. I said, well, you can stay with me, but the condition wasn't that she can come live with me, but apparently she felt that that's what it was. And after a couple of months of basically becoming dominating, I said, I think you need to find somewhere else to live. And after she moved out, it's been 9 years now, and I haven't seen or heard from her since. Now, it was rough to have to do what I had to do, but it was necessary. We didn't raise you to be someone who's going to go and sponge and leech on people. We tried to raise you to be independent, was really the story. And but that doesn't make it any easier to deal with, because as a parent, I know you share your story in the book. You want to be involved, know how they're doing, things like that, have that connection that we tend to see on television, those loving Hallmark families. But that just doesn't exist as much in the world as they would lead us to believe, does it?
No, and we just came off the holiday season, so we saw an awful lot of that. And every year during the holidays, or even the more minor holidays, as well as holidays around the world that I don't know them all, I hear from people, there's this huge increase in traffic at the website. And part of it, I think, is because of all that commercial stuff that we get about this perfect family, the Hallmark card, the Norman Rockwell pictures, and we're expected to have that, and it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing and shameful when you don't. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist in some form, or that it can't exist, or that this is the majority that don't have something like that. But definitely, there are a lot of people that just don't have that and feel shame. And it's a shame that they feel shame, because then we hide and we don't talk about it. So I'm very grateful that you've had me on the show today, because I think it's something that really needs to be talked about more openly in our society, and not in such a way of judgment, which is the way you hear so often.
And you're so true, Sherry, because I remember, and this was probably about 8 years ago, actually probably even further than that, I encountered a couple I was having a talk with. It was around lunchtime. And they weren't quite my age, but pretty close. And they were talking about how they had children and now they were grandparents. And this is what really blew me away about this, is they were talking about how their own child was kind of controlling when they could see the grandchild. It seemed highly conditional, okay? Mm-hmm. And I kind of remember, that situation was even occurring even with my own parents and our grandchildren, because mm-hmm. my wife and I did divorce. And as they were unfolding this story, and you're looking in their eyes like this, I don't know that I'd say it was shame, but just you could see just under the surface there was pain, like, where did we go wrong? We're not bad people, but that people out there actually carry that feeling of burden, like, what did I do wrong? Why am I not measuring up the way I'm supposed to? And I actually blame, I guess call it entertainment media, for making us believe this nonsense in the first place.
Yeah, I think you have a very valid point there. And that whole thing about grandparents, I mean, of course, when you're the parent, you should be in charge, and we wanted to be that way with our kids as well. But it seems like there's these situations where grandparents, they expect it to be involved, and it's such there's some sayings about that, how it's like you get your crown when you become a grandparent, and you finally get to enjoy these children without having the other parts of it, the discipline or the homework and all of that. And so we look forward to that. And then when we don't get to enjoy that, I think the grandparent issue is where it's just such I think it's one of the most deeply painful. And it comes at a time in life when, if you're familiar with any of the psychological stages out there that people talk about, there's Erik Erikson, and one of he did whole life stages. And when people get to those later adult stages, he called it the stage of generativity. And it's giving back. And so many people thought that a part of their giving back would be spending time with those grandchildren, imparting knowledge, sharing hobbies. Some of them have a lot of time to do that maybe the parents are working. And so to just rip that away, and also in a lot of the cases that I see, the estrangements have occurred after the grandparents have become so bonded. And so not only are the grandparents hurting, but those grandchildren are hurting. And in fact, I've even heard from some of the grandchildren and about the struggles that they faced as a child, having that relationship just ripped away, and then maybe hearing their grandparent denigrated by a parent, because kids are smart. They hear a lot. They know what's going on. And some people have said, my parents were wrong. And so you think about that, too. It's not just grandparents that are hurting. There's a whole younger generation that is affected by this as well.
Yeah, like I said, and it's really unique to understand that, this ideal we were talking about how we tend to see this perfect family. You look at the Brady Bunch. I mean, this is a family of, for instance, it's a step family, and I don't know any step families that get along that damn good, especially with that many kids. It just doesn't happen. I mean, it's possible, but it doesn't happen. Okay.
It made for great TV.
It certainly does. But here was the point. My wife and I were talking about this. We were out on a little road trip just recently, and we were talking about this particular program we were about to do with you. And I said, after World War II, that family situation just didn't exist. It probably did in pockets here and there, and it does. There's no doubt about that, that it does exist. But the fact is, most of the time it doesn't. And then even more so with the way we're seeing as technology has evolved and created all new realities that are completely selective now.
Yes.
That our younger generations are being led in a direction to become biased in a way that this stuff is real, that what they hit on their social media, things like that they're actually moving toward their own supported biases, and we don't even know where those come from, where their ideas, their values and so forth come from, to a point that it's become on demand, and any other way just isn't going to work. And I think one of the stories that I wanted to bring up that you talk about in your book is one about a daughter who ends up connecting with a man who becomes her fiance, and she all of a sudden just, and also as a result of her fiance, just gets cut out of their life cold as they get engaged to be married. Let's talk about that story for a second.
I'm not exactly sure which one. I think there's
It was
a
the
couple.
one where she's about to marry into a family that seems well-to-do.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because that one there, I was looking at that going, okay, so because sometimes, a family might feel their son or daughter becomes estranged as a result of a relationship. Like, that person, that may be true, but maybe not always. Because as you talk about your experience with your own son, Dan, is that even your own children were saying, no, this was happening with him in degrees. You just didn't see it coming yet. So it feels like it happened right away. That's why I thought this would be an interesting story to bring up.
Yeah, and it is true. That particular woman had, if I remember correctly, I don't have the entire book memorized at this point.
Oh, that's okay.
but I think she was a single parent and had raised her daughter and had struggled, but had done quite well, or well enough, where she thought, where she had given her daughter everything she needed and done what she thought was the right thing to do and felt close to her. And her daughter did meet someone who was of a higher socioeconomic status. And there is a scene that she relayed to me, which I relayed in the book, where she went to see her daughter and the fiance's entire family was there. It was in a better neighborhood, of course, and she was made out to be this, crazy woman. And that daughter, really, that family had sort of taken that daughter under their wing and were able to show her a different reality than her mother could give her. I mean, it involved traveling to Europe, expensive gifts, labels, things that maybe that mother wasn't able to give materially. And so I do think that is true. That happens sometimes. In fact, I would say I hear fairly regularly from parents who say that another family was able to buy their child's love. And it's really a shame. And in all the thousands, I mean, there's been over 30,000 people who have answered my survey now. I've talked to people every day and really in the trenches with them. I hear that there are these families who sort of I think they view it. There seems to be this rescue element involved sometimes where they think they're rescuing this person away. And, of course, to the parent left behind, they feel like their child is being plucked away. But you bring up an interesting point that maybe these sons and daughters really were moving more towards something anyway. Maybe that comes down to the social media, the reality TV shows that depict these lifestyles that are different than what they're used to. And I think that happens. I also think that what you talk about these other realities out there, there is this element of parents today. A lot of the estranged adult children will say that their parents were toxic. You may be aware that word, toxic, was chosen by the Oxford Dictionary as the word of the year for 2018.
Well, how about that? Now, why is that? Just out of curiosity.
And when you look, it's because of its use. It's used everywhere, and it's used, I talk about this in the book, how it's used a different way now than it was maybe when we were kids. It used to mean something that you wanted to stay away from. But nowadays, I did a search the other day on the Internet for how to tell if my mom's toxic. And you would just be so surprised, maybe you wouldn't be surprised about how many pages and pages of articles come up. And, for years I worked for magazines, and as a result of that, I have sort of a back-end view of what it's like to be the writer who's looking for information experts to comment for articles. And one of the things that I often see is writers who are looking for website writers, some of them not so great, not so credible. They're looking for for experts who will comment on how to tell if your mom's toxic, how to tell if your mother-in-law is toxic, that sort of thing. And so that word is just used such a negative way. And if there are studies out there that show that people, and particularly younger people, rely on social media for their news, those websites push their articles on social media. And so it's a pretty scary and troubling thing when you consider that they could be being influenced by this sort of media that really does no good. I mean, if it's tearing down and giving excuses to just knock your parents out of your life, that's sad to me, and I find it very troubling, and it scares me, frankly.
And you bring up a really interesting point, especially this day and age, the way we tend to look at science and give it so much credibility. And the fact is, in science, it's become to a point that I'm not so sure that it's even, what it is anymore, as you can tend to prove anything you want to. So I remember having a guest on the program some time ago, and he says, do you know why we watch the news? And I said, okay, well, let me know. I didn't say, it's because we want to be informed, because I don't buy that either. He says it's because you want to support your bias. And we now live in a world where our biases are fully accessible. So when you talk about this, there might be, let's say, a son or a daughter that's become hurt because you said, no, you can't go spend the night at your best friend's tonight. And you probably, as a parent, have a good reason behind that. And the next thing you know, they're online, they're looking at social media, they're pissed, and something like that article comes up, and then they start thinking, well, I might have some of that. So they start buying into their own belief and following it, and pretty soon, it becomes the gospel. And that's the scary part, is that people just don't seem to think anymore. They're just led into what they believe is their own thinking. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, some of those articles, I told you I did that search the other day, and I was baffled at the ideas that they came up with. I mean, I can't think of an example right now, but it felt as if almost any complaint you could have could be proof that your mother or your father or whoever is a toxic person. It's not just parents. I mean, it's boss, teacher, whoever. But you're very right. I mean, those biases, it's so true. It's just so true. So it's a scary thing, and I think maybe it could contribute to more and more estrangement. Maybe that's why we're seeing more and more of it in the news. There's a golf star out there who has some issue with his parents, and that's been in the news. There's the Meghan Markle thing with the prince, and I have a little Google search thing that tells me when there's new web results with the word estrangement in it, and it comes up all the time in the news now. So, and in fact, it is interesting that when I first started looking into this, and when this experience happened to me, there was less out there. And in the last year in particular, but in the last few years, it's just grown more and more and more that people are talking about it. And unfortunately, a lot of what you see are excuses about just what you're saying. I mean, that, there's a bias, and people are able to find proof or whatever and move on. And this cutting off of people, that's not to say that there are not truly abusive situations. We all know that. But it isn't what I see, and, that's not the people I work with. It's not necessarily the people that would read my book. And I don't know, I don't know. I guess that upsets me that is so often put out there, so that it tends to be the belief, and why parents start to feel so judged. And we talked about shame earlier a little bit, and there's also this element when this happens to you for a lot of parents, maybe not all of them, maybe mothers more than fathers, I don't really know, but there is this element of wanting to protect your child because you do not think this is going to continue. You think this is some sort of a phase. You can't imagine this. You think for a minute, has my child, my son, my daughter, have they gone crazy? And so you don't want to tell other people about it in the beginning because you want to protect their reputation. Meanwhile, unfortunately, sometimes estrangement is more than just a cutting off and there's behind your back. Sometimes there's a huge character assassination going on and lies being told. And by the time you figure all that out, other people have formed alliances in your family and everything else. I mean, I've learned just how far-reaching estrangement can be, and it's a very sad thing.
So now that we've pretty much enlivened and enlightened our audience to the fact that this does exist, everybody likes to point out, hey, there's all the problems and this does exist. We certainly have established that. Now, the next thing is a parent decides, I'll do everything I can to see if I can reconcile this as though it's completely and 100% their responsibility, perhaps even their fault. Let's talk about that.
Well, parents, the majority of parents do wonder, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? How can I fix this? And most, if like me, I looked at my son's entire childhood. Thankfully, I had other people in the family who said, no, you treated him just like us, so that helped. But, even I picked out little things that I remembered tiny little instances and then magnified them because I was in that frame of mind of looking, there's got to be a reason and there's got to be a way to fix this. So, parents do that. Unfortunately, what sometimes happens to parents is that they fall into a category where they want to get help. They seek advice to maybe go about trying to reconnect. And one popular thing that's out there is for parents to write an amends letter, and I talk about that in the book too. But what often happens is people just start, apologizing for things they never even did. They're just so desperate to fix this that they apologize for things they ever didn't do. And really, my experience from talking to so many thousands of parents is that letter, which it's too bad it can't be face-to-face, but often it must, be in a letter because they won't talk to you or they blocked every means of communication except for an email or a text, that it becomes this way for the child to then validate, see, and prove that, why'd you apologize if it wasn't true? And so that's a shame too. And in fact, it's almost, it baffles me that some of the advice out there is to do this because it almost asks the parent to step into this delusion and join in to something that never happened. And really it does prove to validate it. And so that's not a good thing. So really, when people come to my book, the book is designed to help them look at things from a realistic perspective because reconciling, there's a whole thing about what does it mean to reconcile, and there might be something different that your child, maybe they're fine with texting you twice a year versus what you want, and so they're, to look at relationships in general, what you want out of them, and to really look maybe even at what the relationship was like before the estrangement, because so many times there has been a history, like you were talking about with your daughter, for instance, of, where things haven't been good. And so often parents are so quick to forgive and forget because, when your kids are little, they do all sorts of things. And, that's part of being a parent is guiding them and recognizing that they're imperfect human beings. But there does come a point where that has to stop because these are adults. And you may or may not know that the average age of estrangement is 31. So the idea that I think is out there that these are very young adults, that's not always true. In fact, I hear from people who are estranged for the first time, or maybe for a more complete estrangement much, much later in their adult children's lives. So that's really where the book takes people, is to, take a realistic look at what the relationship was like before, and are you ready now to say, all right, I've done what I can, and it's not working. It's time for me to now stand in my own life and move forward in my own way, because I can't do anything about this person over here. They're an adult. They make adult choices. And so that's really where the book begins, to help people to see, am I ready to do that? Can I do that? And then take them through a series of looking at things from a realistic perspective, and so that they can sort of reclaim their confidence, because so many people are just so devastated by this. And it can be so far-reaching. They've started isolating themselves, and they don't see friends anymore because it's too painful to hear other people talking about their grandchildren. And they're embarrassed. They don't want to talk about it. They fear the judgment that maybe they've gotten. And so, did I answer your question?
Yeah, it does, and not only that, but you brought something up about being around other people, and it's funny because I keep remembering this movie. I think it was starred Julia Roberts and Brad Pitt. I think it was called The Mexican. And they were having problems, but that's how their relationship was. It was a comedy, and she was kind of captured by a guy anyway, not to get into the actual movie itself, but there's a scene in the movie where she's talking with the guy that she's with, who's sort of like a bodyguard or something like that, and she was talking about love, and that when your relationship isn't working out, and you're feeling the pain or something like this, and this isn't verbatim, but I remember when I first seen this, I thought this is so true, that she says, so, here you are, you don't have this relationship or it's not working out, but then you look and you see it all around you and you see that it's possible and it makes you hurt. And what you had brought up is that, you may be around friends or you may be around people, they're talking about, yeah, my son or my daughter, they're off, or they just graduated from college, or I'm about to be a grad. And you hear this all around you, and you're thinking to yourself, where did I really go wrong? Why couldn't I have that for myself?
Yeah.
And you can see how it's important. Well, okay, the reality is it isn't, but I can still move forward. I'm not a bad person. I'm worth loving. I'm a friendly, and you really have to move forward. And here's something that I sometimes invoke in myself is when I look at natural laws. For instance, humans seem to be the only type of animal out there, because we are group animals that can tend to have, these kinds of feelings versus the rest of the animal kingdom to a degree. And I keep remembering in my mind one time seeing a documentary on sharks. And they showed the shark actually giving birth in the ocean, okay? So the shark gives birth, the baby shark comes out, and what happens is the baby shark just immediately swims away off into the depths, never to see its mother again.
Yeah.
I thought, well, that works pretty well.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we should do, too, from time to time. If the child just decides to go that direction, let them go, know.
Yeah, there's an article on my website, rejectedparents.net, where I asked people, are you an octopus mom? And the reason I did that is because a couple of years ago there was this, some people who had studied this particular octopus, and I guess it's very common. I think it's considered the giant octopus or something. I can't remember now, but it's on my website. And there's this octopus that will stay with her eggs and then her babies and not eat, and just totally give up anything to do with their own, her own health and vitality, and then just die. And then the babies, of course, they're going on. And so, I do encounter parents who have kind of done that, and in fact, a lot of the mothers that commented on the article and wrote to me afterward thought it was a pretty poignant thing, because it's kind of how they got to. That's the point they got to, even when the estrangement occurred. It became this. The whole focus is getting reconnected, instead of at some point taking care of yourself. And so, that's really where I'm at, is helping people to take care of themselves. Because, I don't know if I want to go so far as having, being the shark mom that just,
Sure. Yeah.
But I get your point, and it's something to really consider. That, where does the responsibility stop and start? I mean, these children grow up, and then what are we to do with our lives? I mean, is it going to be about them forever, even if they're not very nice to us?
Well, that was the other thing I thought about, too. Okay, so there's the case where the child leaves and perhaps you just don't hear from them, or it's, ages and ages. Once in a while they might pop back into your life and then they disappear again, and that can be a little tormenting because you look and see or feel or sense that there's hope. But what about the child that realizes, oh, okay, I've got you right where I need you, so there's an extreme amount of manipulation going on, and they're just making their parent miserable, because the parent's willing to do almost anything to keep this relationship alive, and yet they know inside it's just tearing them up. What about that? Have you encountered circumstances like this?
All the time. And the most common situation like that is when there's grandchildren involved. And for your background research, and probably in my book, there's the phrase about using the children as pawns. And I do see that situation often where the grandparent is, you've got a bond with these grandchildren, and the parents sort of use them as this leverage. And it's not good. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about how it's not healthy probably for the grandchildren to be in that situation, but it's also not healthy for the grandparent. And that whole episodic estrangement thing and the manipulation and all of that, I do think parents have a right. And what I hear often is someone will say, look, I finally said, I'm retired. I only have a fixed income. I can't keep giving. I have to think about the years I have left and being able to maintain some semblance of a lifestyle. And when they tell the child this, that's when the big estrangement occurs. And so they realize maybe that they've been manipulated for years and years and years. And so there are relationships where the parents have sort of enabled the behavior, and parents do need to look at that. They need to look at that realistically and think, all right, well, I contributed in that way. Does it change the fact that the adult child has also been manipulative? No, it doesn't change that. And so the strategy can still be the same of, I need to pull back now, and here's why. There is one person in the book where she says this to her son about, I think it's about his car insurance. You may have read it. And she realizes that, she should have maybe been a little bit more insistent earlier on. And so she doesn't cut him off from the insurance. She gives him a time period where she's, I'm going to have to do this. So there could be deals made. Of course, he didn't follow through, and he wanted to continue the manipulative relationship. But really, is that a relationship, or is that a form of abuse? And that whole thing about elder abuse, in the beginning, I really shied away from using that term. But in so many of the situations that I see, it fits. And so I'm not shying away from it anymore. I mean, there is financial exploitation. There are adult sons and daughters who are horribly manipulative, as you say, but also verbally abusive. There's some horrible statistics about physical abuse, too. And parents, again, often don't tell. And so, those are things to think about. For parents out there maybe listening, maybe they're in a manipulative situation. There's questions in the book for them to really think about how the relationship is. Is it a real relationship? Or is it something where they're walking on eggshells and giving and giving and giving to their own detriment? And there's nothing wrong with at some point saying, look, things have to change. We have rights too. and it's okay to take care of yourself. I mean, children do need to grow up, right? You were saying at the beginning, we raised our kids to become independent adults, and so it's certainly something to think about.
No doubt about that. I know I was raised, when you brought up that insurance situation, I was like, really? But I hear that too, where parents are paying bills. My parents were like, well, you don't pay your insurance. I guess driving isn't that important to you, is it?
Yeah.
I was raised that way. So when you see this world, I suppose, that it was easier for me to deal with this estrangement because I was like, this is a choice you made. Your
Right.
decisions led up to where you're at. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I would like us to have this relationship, but if it isn't going to work, well, okay,
Yeah.
So, but I'm always going to be here, as they talk about in the Bible, the prodigal son that returns. The two sons both get a bunch of riches. One blows it all, and the other one, and then the one's able to come back, and there it is. You're able to come back, but you at least know where I stand after that first round.
Yeah, and it is interesting. A mother the other day just told me, that father didn't chase the son. That kid had to learn a lesson, and it's true. They do have to learn adult lessons, and become their own individual people where they can take care of their own lives. And so that's not to say that I think that there's this huge portion of people who have overly enabled, their adult sons and daughters. I don't want that to come across that way because I don't think that's true at all. But I do think there's bad advice out there.
I agree, especially with people that really don't have a stake in the outcome. See, and that's the other thing to consider is, well, sorry about your luck. I did that. And, well, yeah, you did, but that doesn't apply to this situation. That's where people really should begin to think through. And I think this is the point where I'd like to talk about a little bit about, because I know that we're going to have you back on the program again, is your book is fairly extensive, and that's very encouraging about, processes, for instance, maybe a thing or two people can take away today to begin to at least step forward. Okay, here's the situation. You have an estranged child. You're not feeling good perhaps because you could be one of these parents right now who's feeling manipulated as a conditional way that your child says, okay, I'll be in your life, however, this, for instance. What they could do starting today that they could take away to begin to step in a direction that it can at least help them heal and help them, be, just feel more satisfied in their lives.
Well, there's exercises in the book for people to really take a look at their lives and how this relationship with a manipulative adult child or a completely estranged adult child or an episodically estranged, however you want to say it, even an abusive child, how that has affected them. And because I think sometimes people are you're in the muck of it all, and it's hard to really look at and realistically at what's going on because you're just caught up in the emotions. And so there are exercises in the book to really start to, write down specifically in different areas how it's affected you. There's one in there called Take Stock, and it really covers several different areas of your life, even if you're married, that your relationship with your spouse. I know there was a time period when I realized that my husband and I, whenever we were alone together, we were talking about this, and it was just, wait a minute, what happened to our relationship? So that's one way to just really start to look at specifically in every area of your life, financially, relationships, spiritually. I used to be, before that, the estrangement, I've always been a very optimistic person, and I had sort of taken on this little cynical thing, even when other people were talking about, what they were going to do, and I used to kind of get this little cynical thing, oh yeah, wait, the best laid plans, and I didn't like that about myself. And so looking at yourself specifically as to how this has affected you, you can then start to rebuild or build a new way of living and plan. And so that's where the book comes in, is thinking about your future, too, thinking about today, thinking about the future, maybe thinking about, there's all kinds of questions in the book to help people really take a hard look at the relationship, and has it been what they thought, or did they have this sort of fantasy in mind, because when they're much younger, a child used to be just this wonderful kid who did this, that, and the other, and then they can start to take a look at, well, that changed. This isn't the same person I used to deal with. There's an exercise in the book about what you miss about your son or daughter, and I go into what I missed. There were things that I relied on him for, and then I learned that I could do those for myself. And there's something very empowering in figuring out that, okay, so I missed that. The other side of that coin is what I don't miss. And that's where a lot of people will tell me, wow, I realized that, okay, I didn't miss a lot. There were a lot of things I don't miss. And so
give me like an example or two, just so maybe people go, oh, I didn't think about it that way before.
Well, let me think about it for a minute.
Sure.
So, for instance, in thinking about what you don't miss, was this person all? For me, one of the things was dropping in at inopportune times. I would be heading out somewhere and hear that, and then it would be like, oh, I'm just supposed to alter my plans. Other people might say things like, my bank account is feeling better. I'm not always giving for their bills. Maybe there's more time that they can have. Maybe it's simply the fact that, you had this son or daughter who, for some, it can be something horrible, like, they come over and just are constantly berating the parent or trying to tell them what they're doing is wrong or how to live, or maybe it was loud music that they are just tired of, or maybe they want the TV to themselves. There's a lot of things that people might not miss.
Gotcha. I got a feel for what you're talking about. I just thought I'd throw a couple of examples, perhaps, as our listeners, would say, oh, okay, I see what you mean. What I don't miss. I don't miss them coming and dumping all their laundry and disappearing and expecting me to have it folded and ready when they get back.
Yeah. Yeah, I never did that. That's why I didn't think of that.
I don't miss my son showing up with his transmission saying, this needs to be repaired by Thursday, and by the way, I've got a meeting to go to, so can you have that done for me, Dad?
Yeah. Or watch the kids.
Exactly.
We love our grandchildren, of course, and we want to be with them, but that doesn't mean that we just want them dumped on us all the time. I mean, we're not the parents.
Oh, it'll just be, for the day. I'll be back tomorrow, and then by the end of the weekend they show up and they never called. You don't know where they're at. You're like, oh, now what?
Yeah.
Crazy. So is there a website that you talked about, a website earlier a lot of people are going to? So where is that, and what can people find there?
That is rejectedparents.net, and I update it regularly with articles about different elements of estrangement, try to be uplifting for people and give them strategies on the website and get them to think about things and move forward in their own way. There is also a peer support forum at the website, there's about almost 6,000 members, I think, right now. Of course, not all of them are active. There's probably about 25 or 30 that speak on there daily and regularly, and some come and go as they need. But it is very helpful sometimes because it helps people to realize they're not alone. If there's a question somebody has about something, they can get a lot of input from other parents who have been through it. So there's a community. I guess that's, it helps people to have a community. So that's there. There's also a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/rejectedparents. I did want to mention that on my website at rejectedparents.net/surveys, there are some current surveys up. One is the original survey. It's still going strong and has over 30,000 answers, and I'm learning more and more every day from it. But also I'm doing some research about reconciliation and learning a lot about that, and also about the further effects on the family, because I'm hoping to write more about that and help people, because there are siblings and other family situations that are affected by abandonment, and so that's there too if people want to participate. I also have a newsletter at that website people can sign up for, and I write a newsletter about once a month and keep them apprised of updates to the website.
Well, very good, Sherry. It's been a pleasure, and I was really welcoming to have you on the program because, as I had talked about earlier, as I encountered that couple in the grandchildren scenario and how their daughter was being the way they were, about being highly conditional about how they would visit or be with their grandchildren and experience their grandchildren, I was actually at a point at that moment thinking, where did I go wrong? And then I realized, really, this is happening to other people. Mm-hmm. And you realize it's actually a lot more common than you thought that it was.
Very common.
Because surrounding me at that particular time were a lot of people talking about how their sons and daughters are off to college or they're graduating from college or this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, where did I go wrong?
Yeah, I hear from people often who have been really all alone in this and suffering by themselves, thinking they're the only one, sometimes for 10 or 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's just really, really sad. And so, they think, my goodness, why couldn't I have found this earlier? And, of course, my message is, it's not too late. You found it now.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Sherry, thank you so much for being on the program. And for the listeners out there, the title of the book is Done with the Crying. It's Help and Healing for Mothers and Fathers, they're out there, of estranged adult children. And our guest today joining us, Sherry McGregor. Sherry, thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us today. You don't have to feel estranged. Join us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter. Keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.